When I was going through a foreclosure, there were so many different things running through my mind. And to be honest, none of them were accurate. I remember years ago, someone told me that our mind is usually subject to being somewhere in the past or somewhere in the future, but never really in the present. And what that meant to me in my scenario is that my mind was always in the future and I was always forecasting all of these things that I would think were going to happen. And they weren't, right? So they were myths, things that I thought would happen, or maybe someone told me would happen because of my scenario. So in this video, I want to debunk myths that I wish I knew about previously. So the first thing that you may be thinking is if you miss one mortgage payment that you're going to be in foreclosure. That's definitely a myth if anyone has ever told you that. Now, mortgage servicers do have things in place that will penalize you if you do miss a mortgage payment. The first and most obvious is the impact that it's going to have on your credit. And then the other thing to take into consideration are late fees. So ultimately, if you miss one mortgage payment, yes, it's alarming and it will do damage, but it is not going to trigger a foreclosure. The second myth, and one that I was not aware of, is that once a foreclosure starts, you can't stop it. That is definitely a myth. Once your home is in foreclosure, there are several ways to stop it. As a matter of fact, I covered several things that you should do if you are in foreclosure. So if you haven't seen that video, go back and check it out. Another very common myth is that if you do go through a foreclosure and you are actually foreclosed on, having a foreclosure on your credit will ruin it forever. Now, that is definitely a myth. Don't get me wrong, it will impact your credit significantly, and it will hinder you from buying another home for probably 7 to 10 years. But to think that it will keep you from ever owning another home or having decent credit is definitely a myth. Another myth is that you will lose everything in a foreclosure. Now, I know the word everything is a very vague statement, but what I will say is that every state is different. And in the state of Pennsylvania, there are exemptions in place to protect personal assets. Some may think that if you walk away from your home, that the problem will disappear. Let me be the first to tell you that if you walk away from your home, what it will actually do is it will expedite the foreclosure process. Just like I mentioned, I shot a video that talks about things that you should do, and it does go over what happens if you vacate or leave your home abandoned. If you leave your home, it will actually expedite the foreclosure process. So definitely not the wisest thing to do if you want to avoid foreclosure and keep your home. Now, this next one I love because consumers that I come in contact with generally have this misconception or this myth that the bank wants to foreclose. Let me tell you firsthand, the banks don't want to foreclose. They do not want your house. Banks are not in the business of owning homes. Banks are in the business of banking and issuing loans. That's what they do. So ultimately, they do not want your home. They may make things a little tough and challenging because they do have guidelines to follow, but believe me, they want to keep you in your home. And if you don't know how to do that, well, that's exactly what I'm here for. Now, this next one, I might get some kickback on, but whatever. I'm going to put it out there anyway. And the myth is that when a home is foreclosed on, it's always the fault of the borrower. Now, granted, you signed a document saying that you were going to pay the mortgage, right? That promissory note saying that you were going to pay. Well, people tend to forget that things do happen. People lose their jobs, people become ill, and people do separate from their significant others, which can significantly change the overall dynamic or income that a household brings in, which can put a house into foreclosure. So I would use the word fault lightly, but at the end of the day, if you ask me, not all foreclosures are the fault of the borrower. Now, this next myth, I don't know if it's a myth or just more so stupidity, but some people think that they should avoid or not respond to the notices that they receive from their lenders. Now, don't get me wrong, you don't need to respond every time they send you something, but it is in your best interest to communicate with your mortgage servicer. As a matter of fact, it's probably one of the best things that you should do, although painful and probably not the easiest phone call to make. Being proactive and letting them know your scenario will actually work in your favor. So again, it's a myth. You don't need to respond to every notice, but you definitely should not ignore them. Now, I once thought that there wasn't anywhere to turn. And a lot of people think the same thing. They think that if you are in foreclosure, that you don't have any resources. Well, aside from me, which hopefully I do become one of your go-to resources, you do have other resources in your community, such as HUD housing counselors and other options like NACA, Neighborhood Assistance Corporation of America, which they're advocates. They are in place to help you understand some of your options and ultimately help you stay in your home. Another myth is that you can simply sell the a home and avoid foreclosure. Now, for the most part, that is accurate. But one thing that I want to point out, which is why I'm saying that this is somewhat of a myth, is that you cannot always sell your home. There are things to take into consideration. One of them being equity. Equity means how much money you have between what the home is worth and how much you owe. Once you are in foreclosure, those fees will continue to go up. There are attorney fees, and then obviously the missed mortgage payments with all of those other late fees. So once you're in foreclosure, keep in mind that yes, you can sell your home, but you have to have enough equity to pay off all of the delinquent debt that's on the property. So yes, selling your home is an option, but it's really going to depend where you're at in the foreclosure process and how much equity you have. Ignorance, myth, ignorance, I don't know. But it's definitely a myth or ignorance if you think that foreclosures only impact low income households. Trust me when I tell you, it doesn't matter how much or how little you make. Just as I mentioned earlier, people do fall subject to illness. There are changes in financial status, and there's also changes to relationship statuses. So those three factors alone rules out how much money you make or how little money you make. Foreclosure will impact or apply to anyone. So it's definitely a myth or ignorance if you think that it only applies to people who have low income. Governmental programs cannot help save my home. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, governmental programs, whether it's just meeting with a HUD housing counselor to help you understand some of the options that you have, including things such as grants or other funds available to help keep you in your home. So governmental programs are out there to help keep you in your home, and you should take advantage of them. And if you're not familiar with them, feel free to reach out. Now, these last two are probably the most important in my opinion. They're all important, but these two really jump out to me. That I need to pay someone or a company for help to avoid foreclosure. Now, you're going to see more and more of these illegitimate practices or people reaching out trying to sell you a service to help keep you in your home. As a matter of fact, not only did I go through a foreclosure and almost lose my home, my parents did as well. And one thing that really got under my skin is when my father called me and he told me that he paid someone several thousands of dollars, a company to be in fact, and they were going to help him save his home. Well, those few $1,000s that he exhausted was money that he could have used to get caught up on his mortgage. And again, that's a whole nother conversation, but ultimately you should not be paying anyone, me, a HUD housing counselor, or anyone else to help give you information which will help save your home. That is not a practice that I would encourage for you to sign up for. Trust me when I tell you, there's free help. Again, me, I'm here to help you, but avoid anyone who is asking you for money to give you help. And this last one is important because I've seen people give up on trying to save their home from foreclosure because they were presented or because they became aware of an auction date. Now, an auction date is when the property will actually sell at the courthouse, or a sheriff sale date. It can be referred to as a couple different sales. Okay. Ultimately, this is the day where after that, if the sale occurs, you no longer own the property. Now, there are ways to have that date either extended, or if you have other workout options, like I have discussed in previous videos, you very well may be able to avoid that foreclosure date. So even if you are presented with an auction date or a sheriff sale date, whatever that date is referred to in your scenario, don't give up. There are things that you can do. And again, reach out to me if you need anything. So as usual, friends, in the description, there is a guide that you can download. That guide is free and full of information that will hopefully help you understand some of the things that you can do or should be doing to help stay in your home. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them below or reach out direct. There's also a link in the description, which will allow for you to carve out a 15-minute free consultation with me. And with all of that said, I'm Chris Nelson, the foreclosure fixer in Pennsylvania, helping people like you, and I guess like me at one time, stay in our homes because that's where we belong. Until next time, take care.